The first letter came on a wet night, when the streetlights hummed and rain tracked down the uncurtained windows like claw marks. The couple had just hauled in the last moving box, still dizzy from the smell of fresh paint and damp cardboard, when the new mailbox sighed open and shut in the wind. He found in the stack an envelope with block letters and no return address. To the new owner. Inside, the sentences crawled like ants under the skin. I have been watching the house. My grandfather watched. My father watched. Now it is my time. The letter listed details too specific to be guessed. The color of the daughter's bike, the potted plant on the sill, the song from the playlist echoing through the foyer as they worked. "Do you need to fill the house with young blood?" I requested. It asked, as if a contract had already been signed in a language only the house understood. After that, the house began to breathe differently, slow and shallow, like something unseen was listening. The second letter arrived before they slept there once. It knew nicknames, schedules, even the exact spot where the wife lingered on the landing to admire the banister curve. A porch light fizzed. A motion detector blinked at nothing. A shadow stood too long at the far end of the sidewalk and then smudged away when the husband stepped out and said, "Hello?" into the drizzle. They checked the locks twice, then 3 times. He replaced the deadbolt with a commercial-grade cylinder. She placed bells on interior doors, a string of tiny chimes that would whisper if anything moved at night. They didn't move in. How could they? They sat in lawn chairs in the empty living room one afternoon, listening to the house's settling bones, trying to decide whether fear was rational or a trick of suggestion. The radiator ticked. Outside, a jogger paused at the property line and tied a shoe as if taking inventory. When the letter writer called the house hungry, it felt less like metaphor and more like a ritual sentence passed down with the deed. Police were called, of course. The officers were patient, practical. They suggested cameras, a neighborhood watch, common sense. The neighbors came by with casseroles and a thick silence. Everyone was kind. Everyone's eyes flicked past the corners, the hedges, the dormers. The couple toured the block after dinner, noting porches with perfect sight lines, windows that faced their children's bedrooms. A prank, some said. Envy, said another. Zoning dispute, whispered one, though no one could say what grievance would wear such an ancient voice. They rented the house rather than keep it empty. Weeks passed. Then a renter found an envelope, its ink smudged by weather. The writer's tone now mocking, as if delighted the house had 2 different households and still no heartbeat to lull it to sleep. "Why won't you come?" The writer asked about the basement, about a corner under the stairs where the air felt colder even on July afternoons. "I will know when you move your bed," it said. "I will know when you sleep." Nights turned viscous. The watch became reciprocal. They watched the house that watched them. They learned the sounds, pipes, fridge, a branch against glass, and still could not explain the low, patient scrape they heard from the attic, as if someone were tracing the pitch of the roof in fingertips. He went up with a flashlight, throat dry. Dust motes lifted and fell like snow and stale air. No footprints, no nest, just the old beams, the dark. He stood very still and realized the house was so quiet that his heart sounded foreign here. Investigators tried a new angle. Handwriting, postmarks, rumors crystallized around fences like frost. If the writer was close, the writer knew when lights went on, when curtains opened, when the kids played on the sidewalk, chalking hopscotch onto the world. On a foggy morning, he found a letter builder's detail he'd missed before. The writer had used a local phrase only people on that street use for a particular corner. It wasn't proof, it was scent. The twist was that there was no twist, no unmasking, no confession, no courtroom finale that could file the edges of the fear down to some manageable superstition. The family sold, at a loss and with a weariness that felt physical, like a flu. A later owner reported no letters at all. The house returned to its old heartbeat, stubborn and unbothered, as if the ritual had chosen not the structure but the prospect of a certain family's terror. Sometimes the wife drives past on school day mornings and slows just enough to see the porch. The mailbox is ordinary. The curtains are ordinary. All the horror is in the fact that whoever wrote those letters could still be on a porch somewhere, head cocked, counting steps as a stranger carries groceries across a lawn, smiling at the private knowledge that a home can feel loved and hunted in the same breath. The first postcards were crude, almost childish black block letters, accusations slashed like scratches in bark. Circleville, Ohio seemed like the kind of place where secrets stayed small and close to the chest. The letters blew them up to billboard size. "We know what you did." The messages named names, places, times, as if the writer had a seat at every table. A school bus driver began receiving them, accusations that crawled into her home and coiled on the doormat. Her husband got them too. Neighbors, colleagues. The writers seemed to be everywhere, and no one, as omnipresent as the grain silos and just as silent. There was a rhythm to them, a storm and a quiet, a storm and a quiet. The bus driver kept her route steady, doors wheezing open and shut, children thundering up and down the aisle with the casual trust of people who believe adults can solve problems. Then she saw a sign on her route nailed to a post, letters shouting at her with the same black block cadence she knew too well. She stopped. She went to tear it down and found a trap behind the cardboard. A gun, hidden in the box, configured to fire if handled wrong. It didn't. She lived. The trap was disarmed, but the sound of the click that didn't happen lived on, a ghost of pressure on the trigger that could haunt a person when the wheat fields breathed and the wind skates rattled at dusk. Someone was arrested, a relative by marriage, convicted. His friends said he'd been framed. His enemies said justice had dragged its blunt net across a pond and finally caught a fin. He went to prison. The town exhaled, and then the letters kept coming. From the same hand, the same block letters, the same hunger for theater, postmarked while the convicted man was behind bars. If it was him, how? If it wasn't, who? Circleville shrank under an expanding lens. Everyone's eyes were microscopes now, faces pressed close to grain patterns and fence posts, to postmarks, to the tiny variations in how an R sat on the line. At night, the farmhouse roads felt longer. Porch lights cast honey yellow puddles onto gravel, half-light that made everything beyond seem like it was leaning toward you. More letters arrived. "We see," they said. "We know." New targets were named. Old ones were revived. The writer's obsession wasn't just with sin, but with the dramatic function of its exposure, the way fear rearranged families like furniture. Holmes developed a new ritual. Check the lock, check the mailbox, check the night. The investigator in you wants the smoking gun, that perfect thread to pull the odd envelope glue, the fiber, the fingerprint. There were such threads. Some led somewhere, some unraveled in your hands. Experts talked about disguised handwriting, about how a person can torque the ordinary look of their language into something that lives between print and scrawl. The town talked about grudges, small-town calculus, the inventory of who might gain from a particular humiliation. A letter would arrive, a child's birthday party would go silent, a smile would stiffen at a church door. Years moved, not like a clean calendar flip, but like a ditch filling inch by inch with cold water. Some people left Circleville. Some stayed and built lives around what couldn't be solved, like farmers who build fences around sinkholes and quit walking that patch of land. The letters slowed, then sputtered, then stopped, or seemed to. A generation came up that knew the story the way children know a haunted house on the edge of town, its outlines sketched in retellings, with a darkness inside that felt less like an explanation than a permanent vacancy. The twist is that the writer's identity remains fog thick enough to disorient, thin enough to see faces in it if you want to. The man convicted always maintained innocence. The letters that arrived while he was in prison suggested either a conspirator or a mimic, and the possibility that the true power wasn't in being believed, but in making disbelief useless. To this day, Circleville has two versions. One where a single person did a cruel thing and was caught, and another where a community was taught that language itself can be weaponized anonymously, and that a place's most ordinary surfaces, mail, signs, the shape of an R, can be turned into a stage for terror so mundane it feels unstoppable.
Language itself can be weaponized, and terror hides in the ordinary. Every neighborhood has a story. In Denver, it began with a routine.
Genre: true crime divided by true horror. The old Denver house creaked the way old houses do, every plank a throat clearing. It was winter cold enough to keep milk on the back step, and the occupant, an elderly man with meticulous habits, had his life timed to the minute. Neighbors waved from porches and could set their watches by the way his lamp went out. Then, one night, the pattern broke. The lamp burned longer, then died early the next. A chill settled over the block, the kind that makes you step a little closer to your own door and turn the key faster. Police found the man dead, inside assaulted, the back door locked from within. It felt impossible. They searched the house the way you search a dream for logic. Closet doors flung open, curtain hems lifted, attic hatch tested. No footprints in fresh snow, no sign of forced entry. The room smelled of dust and old wool. A policeman ran his hand along a baseboard and came up with a streak of gray on his glove. They locked up and left into a night so clear it felt like it could shatter. Strange small things began to happen. Food went missing. A loaf heel, a slice of cheese, a chair that faced a slightly different angle in the morning, like someone had sat and carefully replaced it. The neighbor who held the spare key came in at noon one day with the mail and swore she heard air moving from somewhere it shouldn't, like a throat behind drywall. She told herself it was furnace noise, told herself a lot of things, and yet the house gained a new pronoun in everyone's sentences. Not it, but he or they, even when no one could explain why. They scoured the house again, slow as a prayer. In the bedroom closet was a panel, not much bigger than a folded newspaper. Behind it, a crawl space mottled with shadows. The first beam of the flashlight hit nothing but grime, but the second pass found two eyes, dulled by darkness and shock, set in a face so thin it looked carved from the idea of hunger itself. A man unfolded from the void with the terrible delicacy of someone who's learned to move without sound. He tried to bolt and tangled in his own limbs, weak from a diet of stolen bites and the kind of fear that burns more calories than work. It turned out he had been living above the house, crawling down when the occupant was out or asleep, emerging like a fold in a story to tiptoe through another person's life. He knew the creak map of the floors, the exact places where pressure went quiet. He went up with food and a pitcher of water like a ghost carrying offerings back to the mausoleum. They called him the Spider-Man. Not for agility, he had very little left, but for the awful fact that he'd constructed a web out of another man's routines and sat in it for months, waiting for moments of empty air. The neighborhood never learned to tell the tale without lowering their voices, as if the house could hear. Some called it a cautionary story about locks and windows and the folly of routines. Others couldn't get past one image, the inch of open closet panel in the darkness, a sliver of air between living and being lived above. There is a kind of horror that is supernatural, and there is a kind that is simply human proximity, the knowledge that a person can be hurt or haunted by someone only a sheet of plaster away. The house went on being a house. New people moved in and painted things light, and the floors kept their secrets under a glossy finish. The twist is how small the distance really was. Not blocks, not neighborhoods, not miles, just a handful of inches of wood and lath, a decade's worth of dust for insulation. The killer was not a stranger breaking in from the outside. He was inside already, learning the rhythm of another life until he could move in it like a second shadow. In daylight, the crawl space looked uninspired, a dark cupboard for pipes. At night, it was a stage. The hatch, an eyelid. The room, a lung. People like to believe that the boundary between safety and danger is a door you can lock. The Denver house reminds us it can just as easily be a panel you never thought to open, a breath you didn't think to listen for, a space the size of a person pressed between your ceiling and your fear.